Hello everyone, welcome to this introductory presentation on rhetorical concepts. In particular, in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the rhetorical square and Aristotle's rhetorical appeals, ethos, logos, and pathos. First, let's get a working definition of rhetoric. Now, Webster's defines rhetoric as the art of speaking or writing effectively. The second definition that's been around for thousands of years is one that comes down to us from Aristotle. Aristotle defined rhetoric as the ability in each particular case to see the available means of persuasion. So you can see these links between communication skills and persuasive skills. And that gives us an understanding that in everyday life, as well as in school, our ability to create shared understandings with other people succeeds or fails based on our mastery of rhetorical skills. So, I want you to understand that rhetoric is not just something we encounter in the classroom, but it's something that we encounter in everyday life. Now, this may seem like a strange image to be looking at here, but I wanted to talk about a couple of ways in which I've noticed rhetoric showing up in my own life just over the past week during the course of the summer. This first image you may recognize if you are a music fan is a photograph of the electronica or dubstep music creator deadmau5. So deadmau5 is famous for his ability to take sections of music that were created by other people, sample those, and mix them together to create an original composition combined with his own music that he's producing from synthesizer, keyboards, drum machines, etc. Now, my daughter's a big fan of deadmau5, and she's also a big fan of other dubstep musicians such as Skrillex. And she's been listening to this for a while, and my question to her is that really music? Because it doesn't sound to me like anything like the music that I grew up listening to. And her answer to me was that it's not music in a traditional sense, but it's music that's associated with the event where you go to see these artists perform live. And so she's encouraging me to redefine how I think about what music is. Is it something that you'd listen to on its own? Or is it something that you'd only associate with a particular event? So she's making a rhetorical argument there that's based on a definition of music. Is it persuasive? I don't know. You'd have to listen to some of deadmau5's music yourself and decide. Here's another image. The image on the right is an image that was created by the British street artist Banksy. So Banksy traveled to the West Bank, and on a wall that separates people from one side or the other, Banksy created this image, which gives the appearance of a crack in the wall that two children who are sort of stenciled in appear to have painted, and then the illusion is that looking through to the other side, it looks like something that's a beautiful sort of beach scene. Okay, this is a very political illustration, but it's a kind of visual rhetoric. You can see here how Banksy is interested in suggesting something about ways in which we perceive what life is like from those who we are excluded from being in contact with. What are the goals for studying rhetoric in an AP English Language and Composition class? Well, I always like to use this quote from Marshall McLuhan, who said, "We don't know who discovered water, but we know it wasn't the fish." What do I mean by that in the context of rhetoric? Well, rhetoric is all around us. In almost every conversation we have with somebody, they're trying to persuade us to see things their way, create a shared understanding, get us to do something, provoke a particular reaction, get us to empathize with them, for example. And if you can think about these interactions rhetorically, then you can get much greater clarity about what your own purpose is in every one of those interactions. So at a large level, our goal is to be the fish that sees the water. In other words, use your understanding of rhetorical skills to create meaningful shared understandings with other people. So using that backward design method of unit study, we have several essential questions and enduring understandings that we'll come back to through our study of rhetoric. First of all, we want to ask what rhetorical appeals and resources of language do writers and speakers rely on to affect and/or persuade an audience? Secondly, what questions must I be able to answer before I create a written or multimedia text in order for that communication to be persuasive or effective? And thirdly, when I'm analyzing a text, what questions must I consider? In terms of enduring understandings, we want to come away with the understanding that effective speakers and writers make rhetorical choices based on the image they wish to convey and their purpose, audience, and message. And that these rhetorical choices include, among other things, appeals to logic, emotion, the credibility of the speaker, as well as tone, diction, and syntax. One of the first and most important concepts that we're going to learn is the rhetorical square. So this will give us a common shared vocabulary for talking about rhetorical situations. When we write in order to communicate something, and when we read or hear communications from others, we're involved in a rhetorical situation. So rhetorical situations have several elements that we have to think about as we read and write if we want our writing to succeed with readers and if we want to be able to evaluate how well the writing of others succeeds. The first of these is the purpose or the occasion for writing. The audience for whom the writing is done is the second element. The third is the persona or voice of the writer. And the fourth is the message or the argument of the writer. Now together, these elements make up the rhetorical square, and each is necessary to the whole. They're inextricably linked. You don't have an argument without a purpose for arguing, an audience to convince, and a role that you play in order to make that argument effectively. So here are some questions that you should ask when you are preparing to write or speak. What's my purpose? What's causing me to write? Who's my audience? What's their awareness of this issue? What are their needs in this situation? What persona or voice should I adopt? How do I want to come across to my audience? And finally, what's my argument or message? When you're analyzing someone else's writing or speech, here are some questions that are useful. What's the writer's or the speaker's purpose? What occasion is causing her to write or speak? What audience does the writer envision? What assumptions is the writer making about that audience? What persona is the writer assuming? Is an authentic voice projected? And what's the writer's argument or message? Next, we want to talk about rhetorical appeals. Now, over 2,000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle argued that there were three basic ways to persuade an audience that you were right: ethos, logos, and pathos. So ethos is the writer's character or image, logos is logical arguments, and pathos is the emotions of the audience. We're going to look at each one of these in detail individually. So again, ethos is the writer's character or image. The Greek word ethos is related to our word ethics or ethical, but a more accurate modern translation might be image. Now, Aristotle uses ethos to refer to the speaker's character as it appears to the audience. He says that if we believe that a speaker has good sense, good moral character, and goodwill, we're inclined to believe what that speaker says to us. And today we might add that a speaker should also appear to have the appropriate expertise or authority to speak knowledgeably about a subject matter. In politics, ethos is very important as well. On the left, we have an image of Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, and on the right, her husband, former President Bill Clinton. Now, we know from watching the news over the years that these are two people who obviously have a great deal in common. They're married, they've both held high public office, but at this particular point in history, both of them enjoy, with some portions of the population, a different type of ethos. Clinton has been the Secretary of State for some time and is widely believed to have done an effective job, whereas her husband was someone who left public office somewhat in disgrace because not only did he have an affair while he was in office, but he also lied to the public on national television and denied it when in fact later on it turned out to be true. So she's someone who, when she speaks publicly, perhaps has fewer challenges when it comes to the audience believing what she says than he does. The second type of rhetorical appeal is an appeal to logos, or logic and reason. Now, in our society, logic and rationality are highly valued, and this type of persuasive strategy is usually privileged over appeals to character of the speaker or emotions of the audience. For Aristotle, formal arguments are based on what he calls syllogism. Now, syllogisms are reasoning that takes the form of a major premise, such as all men are mortal, a minor premise, Socrates is a man, and then a conclusion. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. However, Aristotle notes that in ordinary speaking and writing, we often use what he calls a rhetorical syllogism, or an enthymeme. Now, an enthymeme is an argument in which some of the premises remain unstated or are simply assumed to be true. For example, no one in ordinary life would think that Socrates could be immortal. We would simply assume that Socrates could be killed or that he might die of natural causes after a normal lifespan. Persuasion, to a large extent, involves convincing people to accept our assumptions as probably true. And similarly, exposing questionable assumptions in someone else's argument is an effective means for preparing the audience to accept our own contrary position. The third and final one of the rhetorical appeals we're going to look at is appeals to pathos, or the audience's emotions. Now, emotions such as anger, pity, fear, and their opposites can powerfully influence our rational judgments. You can see where, if we combine these three types of rhetorical appeals to ethos, where the credibility of the speaker is unquestioned, appeals to logos, where rationality and logic are strongly shown to be supporting an idea, and emotional appeals, that taken together, those three in combination, can often successfully make arguments highly convincing. Well, thank you for watching this presentation, the Introduction to Rhetoric. And if you have any questions at all about any of these concepts regarding the rhetorical square or Aristotle's rhetorical appeals, you can email them to me at jblaber@redwood.org, or you can bring them up in class if you're a student of mine.